All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here at this scholarly presentation virtual event. For those of you who don't know what scholarly presentation is, basically this has been going on for a few decades now. It's a very long running event on campus. And faculty members selected to present their research to kind of engage the school and the community in the research that they're doing. Since COVID, we haven't been able to have our normal in-person event, which is usually in the Performing Arts Center. It's usually a whole big formal theatrical performance, but we wanted to keep it alive. So we've been doing these revisits where past presenters just give an update on what they've been doing since their presentation. So I'm going to be doing a revisit of my 2012 presentation. I'm Dr. Etheridge. I'll give you an introduction of myself in just a minute. But before we get to that, I just have a couple of announcements. First thing is we are planning on having this event in person in the fall for the first time since 2019. So please be on the lookout for that. It will be Professor Michael Habib, and he'll be talking about these very large flying reptiles from the age of dinosaurs. And a couple other announcements you'll see in the chat. If you are here and need attendance, if you're a student, please make sure that you put in the chat Q&A that you are a student, you have your first and last name, and then please put your instructor's name so that we are able to send your instructor your name so that you can get attendance points for being here. And if you are faculty, please put your first and last name and then flex next to it so I can submit that to professional development so you can get your flex credit for that. So you'll be seeing that posted a few times just to remind you. And then my presentation is about 45 minutes or so, and then I will open it up for Q&A afterwards. So if you have any questions that you want to submit for me, you can put that also in the little Q&A tab, and then I will get to as many of those as I can. And you can be anonymous. So if you have a question, but you're a little bit shy, feel free to still submit that, and we will talk about that at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and begin my presentation. And then, as I said, you might see some things pop up in the chat just to remind you. Oh, before I forget as well, this will be recorded and it will be posted on our scholarly presentation web page, which is in the COC kind of home base. And so you can see past presentations, you can see my 2012 presentation, as well as the virtual ones that we did last year. So you can see that in the chat. If you click on that link, I will upload this sometime next week, so you can access that as well. Or if you know somebody who wasn't able to attend, you can point them in the right direction. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Sean, I'm just going to double check with you that you can see my slides. Okay, thanks. All right. So welcome to my revisit of the Vanishing Primates. I'm Dr. Sarah Etheridge, and I work in the anthropology department, and I'm the chair of this event. So who am I? Well, as I said, I teach anthropology, primarily biological anthropology. Within anthropology, my focus is primates. So I'm a primatologist. I'll be talking about that for the first part of the presentation today. I also have a PhD in epidemiology, which will be the second part of the presentation. I have a master's certification in genetics and genomics, and I'm finishing a master's in biomedical Egyptology. So I really like science, and I like the interplay of humans, animals, and health and disease, which will all kind of make sense at the end of this talk. So I gave my presentation in 2012, which was called Nothing to Smile About: The Vanishing Primates. And it really focused on conservation of primates, specifically chimpanzees. So it was fitting that 10 years later, I kind of, let everybody know what I've been up to since then. And so what we're going to talk about today, the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of give a recap of that 2012 presentation. I'm going to go over what a primate is, because a lot of people are actually kind of unsure what that term means. I'll talk a little bit about their conservation threats and the focus of my research in Uganda in 2008 and 2009. Then I will give you basically what's been going on since then, which is my PhD work in epidemiology, my work with nonprofits doing clean water, and then now my current work back with chimpanzees. And some of the information I talk about can be a little bit disheartening, but I always want to end on a positive note, let you know how you can help. And then, of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So what is a primate? Well, a primate is a group of mammals that have the following features. So they have flexible skeletons because we evolved for life in trees. We have nails instead of claws. If you look at the skeleton of a dog or a cat, you can actually still see their claws attached to their bone. Primates don't have that. We have nails that sit on top of a nail bed. So if you break or lose one of those nails, it will regrow. We have forward-facing eyes with really good depth perception and color vision. Again, that's very helpful for life in trees. We have opposable fingers and thumbs. That means that your thumb can touch every other finger, and that makes grasping very easy. We also have enhanced tactile pads on our fingertips, which we call fingerprints, but really that is there to heighten our sense of touch. We have very large brains compared to our body size, and we focus on quality of offspring, not quantity. So we tend to have 1 to 2 offspring. We tend to focus on those offspring and really make sure that they are going to be capable adults. We're not having litters of babies at the same time, several times a year. There are 3 groups of primates. The first are kind of what we would consider primitive, and that's not a negative term. That just means that they resemble the ancestral form of primates. And those traditionally were called prosimian. Now they're called strepsirrhines. And then we have what we are more familiar with, monkeys and apes. So here are some examples of these prosimian strepsirrhines. When you look at these guys, you wouldn't necessarily look at them and go, oh, I think that's a primate. It doesn't look like a monkey or an ape. They have these ancestral features. Some of them include very large eyes because they're nocturnal, having a little bit longer snout with a heightened sense of smell. And then some even retain 1 skeletal claw. The eye on the top left corner actually has a whole skeletal finger because he's a tap forager. So he goes up in the trees, he listens for insects inside the trees, tapping with his little skeletal claw. And then when he hears them in there, he can use his rodent-like teeth to kind of puncture the bark and get them out. So lemurs are a good example of this. We have the we have lorises, galagos, bush babies. These guys haven't changed very much since their ancestors millions of years ago. Another set of primates is monkeys, and there are actually 2 types of monkeys based on geography. We have monkeys that are called platyrrhines in the New World, which would be Central and South America. And we have Old World monkeys, which are found in Africa and Asia. Those are called catarrhines. The New World monkeys tend to be smaller, and they tend to stay in the trees a lot more, and they have a specific feature. Some of them have a specific feature you can see in the center picture where their tail is prehensile and can grasp things just like a hand. The Old World monkeys tend to be on the ground a lot more. They tend to be bigger, and they don't have any type of special tail. And then third is apes. And this is, of course, where we go. This is the largest group of primates, and we do not have a tail. And that is something that puts us all together in that classification because we lost that tail with a common ancestor. Now, this picture is very important. It shows kind of a branching tree, and this in taxonomy really shows you kind of how closely related different animals are. And so you can see at the base of the tree would be your common ancestor, and then every branch off of that represents a certain primate. So we have orangutans that branched first, then gorillas, then humans, and then chimps and bonobos. And what is very important about this is if you look at the branches, basically the branches between humans and chimps, that's closer than between chimps and gorillas. And what surprises a lot of people is that chimps and humans share more DNA than chimps and gorillas do. So don't be thrown off just by outward appearance. In primatology, we look a lot more deeply than outward appearance. We look at anatomy, we look at dentition, we look at behaviors, cognition, and of course, genetics. So I am going to talk now about some conservation threats, and some of the images are going to be disturbing. And I do this, yes, to elicit an emotional response, but also just because that is the reality of it. And these are our closest relatives, and we really should be trying to help them survive and not add to their extinction. So the number one threat to primates, especially great apes, is what's called bushmeat hunting. And bushmeat hunting is just hunting of wild animals from the forest to eat. And that's something that goes on around the world. It's something that's always gone on. But the problem is, in some areas, it's focusing on endangered animals, and that's very, very dangerous. It's also connected to a lot of other conservation threats, including deforestation and logging, the biomedical trade and the illegal pet trade, and palm oil in Asia. And so basically, when you have an endangered species that is being targeted, that becomes very dangerous. And I'm going to explain why in just a second. Great. So the reason why bushmeat is so bad for apes is what we call life history theory. And it's that idea of, do you focus on quality of offspring or quantity of offspring? So if you're an animal that has litters of babies every year, something like a rabbit, if someone goes out and hunts one rabbit, it's not really going to affect the population, because they're going to be able to have other litters that are going to, provide way more babies than they need to make up for that one missing rabbit. But if you're looking at a great ape, let's say a chimpanzee who doesn't mature until at least age 12, and then usually has one offspring every 5 years or so, if you're going to kill a female chimpanzee, it may take 15 to 20 years to replace her and her offspring in that population. So when you have a very slow reproducing animal, this makes their hunting very, very, very dangerous for the survival of that species. So why in the world do people hunt primates? Well, number one, sometimes they don't have any other protein source. Okay. We also have to remember that in the areas where I worked, in the areas where bushmeat hunting is such a problem, there's not a lot of infrastructure. It's not the same world we live in over here. We can't, they can't just go down to the grocery store or go down to McDonald's and get some food. They are living off of nature. And so they don't have any other options. And sometimes there's a cultural preference for that meat. But a lot of times what I found is people are doing a cost benefit analysis, right? We want to put in the least amount of energy, but get the greatest return. And you're going to see some pictures in a minute of what it looks like to try to trek through a forest in, say, Uganda. It's not easy to walk through. And so if you're going to put yourself in danger, you're going to expend all this energy, you're not going to want to do all of that for one little rabbit. You're going to want to do that for a larger animal that's going to provide you a lot of meat. And then if that animal happens to be rare and so will fetch you a higher price at market, then of course you're going to go after that animal. But what does that do? It reduces the population more, makes the animal more rare, which makes it more valuable. And you start to have this snowball effect, which usually leads to extinction. So these are common images of bushmeat hunting. You can have monkeys, you can have apes. What's very dangerous about this is what we call anthrozoonotic disease transfer. The closer animals are evolutionarily, the more easy it is to transfer diseases. And this is how we have things like Ebola and even HIV in the human line, is because you are butchering animals that have, in some cases, almost 99% identical DNA to you. You are exchanging body fluids through that butchering, and then you're consuming that meat. It makes it very, very dangerous on an epidemiological level as well, because this is how we get new diseases in our population. I want to be very clear, though, that we're not judging these cultures. We're not judging these people. We're analyzing the situation and we're trying to find solutions to help everybody. And this was something that I really was humbled with when I first moved to Uganda to do my research. because I went there as a naive, like 24-year-old American. And I'm like, I'm going to go save all the chimps. And I get there and I see how difficult life is for these people. And I thought, I can't go around telling these people they need to treat animals better. I'm going to sound completely callous and like I don't care about them as humans at all. So this kind of was something that drove me to the next part of what I'm going to talk about. But first, let's talk about my research that started in 2008 in Uganda. So I was very lucky to be able to go and work with a project that was associated with the Jane Goodall Institute and was also kind of an extension of my master's research. So the first thing I did was I stayed for a while at Ngamba Island, which is an island on Lake Victoria. And it's really amazing. They take orphan chimpanzees and they basically allow them to learn how to be chimpanzees in a safe environment. So most of the island is fenced off and wild, allowing the chimps to roam around and act like they would in a natural environment. We can go in there and supplement them with food. We can help them learn how to groom, learn how to climb trees. But we stay kind of in the fenced off area, I guess. And so it's really amazing to be able to interact with these creatures and, also to be able to save these orphans, because the parents or the mothers do spend so much time, caring for them and teaching them that it's very hard for them to survive if they do not have their mothers. So at night, they would kind of come up to these enclosures. They could stay in the enclosures if they wanted to. If they didn't want to, they didn't have to, but they would come and get, kind of a full meal to make sure that they were getting enough nutrients. We would look over them, see if anybody had any, cuts. Does anybody look sick? Does anybody need medication? And it was just a way for them to decide whether they wanted to be in one kind of enclosed area safely at night or if they wanted to stay out. And usually the younger ones would come in and the older ones would kind of have a little bit more independence and stay out all night. So then I moved to this tiny village called Muntemi, which is kind of on the border of the Congo. And I lived out there for several months in a tent next to villagers. And I was there to track chimpanzee movement through a forest to try to get an idea of the population in that forest, because that area was undergoing significant deforestation. And the Jane Goodall Institute was worried that all of the chimps were leaving that area. So they wanted to see, is there evidence that they are there? Are the populations fragmented? Are they migrating? So that was kind of the heart of my research. The villagers were absolutely amazing. I hired local people to be my field guides because they have just an amazing sense of knowledge, indigenous knowledge. They could tell you every plant, every tree, every fruit, every flower, every animal. They knew everything about it, and they kept me safe and taught me so much. And it was really amazing to be welcomed into this community. And that's really where I started to realize I really love my chimps, but we also have to think about the people, not just the animals, because they're not separated, right? They're living next to each other. They are connected. And so we have to help people if we're going to help the animals. So here's an image of what it looked like every day walking through the forest. It's not like just walking through a nice forest with trees and there's grass under your feet. This is what it looked like most of the time. I was doing 1 kilometer transects using a GPS and GIS and kind of mapping that out to see an actual kind of, two-dimensional map that we would make, and plotting any data that I found along the way, which could include seeing nests in chimp nests in trees, because chimps and gorillas go up into the trees at night, fold down branches and make a nice little bed of leaves to sleep in. It could be evidence of food. It could be evidence of, actual like footprints, and it could be, hearing them or actually seeing them. Any of those things we plotted down to see how many chimps we think were in that area. So you would walk through this, chopping at it with a machete. And so I want to remind you that if you are doing this on a daily or weekly basis to try to get food, you're going to want to maximize the amount of food you're bringing back if you're having to put in this much energy in order to do that. So for my master's thesis, I was kind of analyzing everything I could think of, and I wasn't really getting anywhere. And my advisor sent me an article on why people decide to go to college. And at first I thought, okay, wait, is this a dig at me? Are you saying like I'm wasting my time? And what I realized is it was an article about an economic analysis of investment. If you graduate high school, or you don't even graduate high school, you just enter the workforce, you're going to start earning money. And everybody else who is going to college, you're going to be making more money than they are, right? So it seems at first glance like, why would you end up going to college, paying money, maybe going into debt when that person over there is not doing it and they have more money than you are? Well, it's an investment strategy. So you are incurring a loss at first in terms of student loan debt, with the hopes that what you learn is going to get you a job, that you have advancement and you can end up making a lot more money than that person who's going to basically plateau in the job that they started at. So I started thinking about this idea of investment, and I looked at the humans in the area as well as the chimpanzees. And there's something called the Human Development Index or Human Development Rank. I'm going to call that HDI. And it's basically a quantifiable way to measure quality of life. How happy and healthy are people? And what I found was when I started plotting the HDI level with the amount of chimpanzees in the area, there's a very strong positive correlation. What that means is you can draw a line from the bottom left of this chart to the top right, and it goes right through all of these points, which means that as the quality of life or HDI gets higher, there's more chimpanzees in the area. So happier people means happier chimpanzees. The only outlier up here in the top left is the Kibale National Forest, which is a protected forest that is under the control of Jane Goodall Institute. So there aren't really any humans there. And of course, because there's no humans, chimpanzees are doing absolutely great. But this is kind of the heart of my Uganda research, that as quality of life goes up, the quality of life of chimps also goes up, and we see higher populations. So then I said, what do I do about this? And this is why I decided to do my PhD in epidemiology. I decided, for the sake of my chimps, I had to forget about my chimps and focus on humans. And I wanted to know, how can I improve human quality of life? Some of the measures of HDI are access to food and clean water, access to education and jobs, and access to medical resources. So while I was researching this, I kept coming across a lot of statistics about water, and that really piqued my interest. So unclean water is one of the biggest threats to children's health and survival in the world. Every year, more than 3.4 million people die because of water-related illnesses. And that's the leading cause of disease and death around the world, which is pretty shocking for us because we are very spoiled and we can get up and walk into our kitchen and turn on the faucet and have clean water. That is not the reality for at least 1 billion people on the planet. And according to the UN, 4,000 children die every day as a result of waterborne diseases caused by drinking unclean water. And so 4 out of every 10 people in the world, especially in Africa and Asia, do not have access to any type of clean water to drink. And I thought, that's a huge problem that very much affects the quality of life of people. And that is something that I can actually work on. So this is where I focused my epidemiological education. And then after I graduated, going into the nonprofit sector. So for my dissertation, I wanted to focus on waterborne illnesses, and I wanted to use what we call a biocultural approach. So we're not a product just of our genes and biology. We're not just a product of our environment. It's both of those things working together. So I decided for my dissertation to try to change people's attitudes and behaviors, which is pretty much the hardest thing that you can do. But I started working with an organization called Life Water, And every time they went into a new community, they would start from scratch because they'd say, well, we don't know what this community needs. We don't know what their beliefs are. We don't know what their behaviors are. And I thought that just doesn't seem very efficient. So I wanted to see if I could develop water hygiene education. So education that teaches people how to make their water clean before they drink it. And I could do that in a way that would work in any culture. So I interviewed what we call partners. These are people who live in that area. They are native to that area, but they are working with the organization. And I interviewed people from Kenya, Uganda, Bangladesh, Malawi, the Congo, and Ethiopia. And I wanted to know what they thought about water, how they interacted with water, and what I could do to try to convince them to work with our program. Because again, cost benefit analysis, if you tell people they have to change doing the way they do something, they're going to be very hesitant unless you convince them it's going to benefit them. So my question was, what would motivate people to change their behaviors regarding water? And I found three main things. The first was focusing on children's health. If I could convince them that doing our program could possibly save their child's life, it didn't matter where people came from, they wanted to do that. Then if I could also convince them it would save them time and money, that got them very interested as well. And a fourth thing I found was that for people who were very stubborn or very skeptical, if you could contact a religious figure in the community and get them on board, it was very helpful if that religious figure could also pepper in some things about hygiene, water, washing hands, those types of things in the religious services, or call upon something from the Bible, the Quran, any type of scripture that would supplement what we were doing so that the people were hearing it from somebody that they trusted and admired. And it was just kind of a secondary way to get that message across. But children's health, time, and money were the main motivating factors. So I like to turn my research into action. I like to go out and do things with it. So I became the program director of an organization called Brightwater Foundation. And then later I became the vice president. And I used what I found in my dissertation research to create culturally appropriate curriculum that would work in any culture. And so what kind of made my approach different was I use what we call a shadow approach. I am an American, I'm a Westerner, and I'm white. I go over to Africa and the people there have every right not to trust me, right? We know historically people like me have not treated people like them very well. So I didn't want to go over there and say, I think you're doing something wrong. Let me teach you how to do it right. Because that's very disrespectful. It's not going to get people to cooperate. And they're probably just going to smile and nod. And then as soon as you leave, they're going to go back to doing it the way they were doing it before. So what I did instead is we would get people that were local to the area that were either very interested in helping because they knew there was a problem. They're really tired of being sick all the time, or people who had some type of health training, usually nurses or nursing students who were kind of in the larger cities, but would come back home to their local village and participate in these programs. I would teach these people, usually a 3-day long kind of crash course, teach them all the curriculum, get them really comfortable with it, give them all of the resources, and then they would go house to house in the entire village and teach every single person this program. And this is really important because now it's not some foreigner coming over and telling you what to do. It's someone you know. It's someone in your community. It's someone you trust. They're going to be able to explain it to you in a culturally appropriate way, and they're going to be able to do that, and you're probably going to listen to it. We also targeted mothers and caregivers because they do tend to be the people who interact with water the most, and they're the ones who take care of the children the most. So we had two programs. One was in Nicaragua from 2015 to 2018, and one was in Ghana from 2019 to 2020. Still kind of going on, but COVID was really difficult because obviously you couldn't be going door to door and interacting with people during the pandemic. So what we do is called evidence-based education. Most of these people have no idea that there are germs and pathogens in water that make you sick. That's just not information that they've ever come across. And that is a very Western scientific view of things. So we had to teach them about these microbes in the water. And we can't just tell them, we have to show them. So we would take these, which I'm going to show you in a minute, portable microbiology kits. They fit just in a Ziploc. This is everything you need. And we would teach these partners, these people in the village who were going to be basically, they're going to work for us. They're going to be part of our staff. And we would teach them this, and they could take this kit door to door and teach everybody else. It uses body heat and available resources to test and purify water. You do not have to pay anything. You do not have to have, medical or health knowledge. You don't have to go to a lab. It's all very easy. Everybody can learn it. And I was actually able to take some of my students to Nicaragua with me in 2017, which was a really amazing experience. So I'm going to show you some pictures from the Nicaragua project. This is what is in our kit, and I'm going to go through kind of what these things are. So basically, the first thing that we have are these little bags. Okay. And so these bags are collections for water. And you can see them in the center picture. You just take them, you can pour some water into them, and then when you're done, you flip it around, and it has kind of like a little metal thing at the top that you pinch together. And now you have a water sample. You can write on it, put it in your, basket, and keep going and collect others. You also have these little tubes, and they have an enzyme in them that reacts with E. coli. So there's lots of bacteria in water. There's lots of bacteria in soil. When you put the water in them and they turn yellow, that just means there's bacteria, but we don't know if it's harmful bacteria. So what happens is then you would take a little UV light. It's basically like the ones they use at nightclubs to check your stamp, right? It's a little handheld one. And when you hold the light next to this, if it glows blue, this is contaminated water. If you drink it, it would make you sick. Secondly, we have these Petri dishes. You can see it at the bottom of the photo. You would take a pipette. You would take just a little drop of water. You would put it on here. And what's really great about both the Petri dish and the tube is you can then put them in a tiny little bag like this. So you would take the Petri dish, put it in the bag, or you would take the tube and put it in the bag. And then you can just put this on your body, strap it to your body, and wear it for the rest of the day. And your body heat will incubate it. And you don't have to have a lab. You don't have to have an oven. You don't have an incubator. You're using your body heat and all available resources. And you can see the next day that there's these blue fuzzy dots on here. That's E. coli growing. So the people could watch it actually grow, and you can actually see these things without a microscope. So this is really, really important because it was able to show people that the water they're drinking is what is causing their illness. And they don't have to take our word for it. It's right here, and it gives them that knowledge. So here you can see I'm with the president of Brightwater Gym, and then I'm with a couple of my students, and we are going through the water samples that were collected by the people in the program, and we are looking at the results. And then you can see on the right-hand side, I'm going to go through some of the curriculum that we developed. But in Nicaragua, the mothers were really the people who volunteered for this program. I shouldn't say volunteer, they volunteered, but they were paid. They became staff for us. So you can see the Petri dishes and the tubes on the left, and then you can see on the right how when you hold the light up, it does glow blue, and that would show you that that water is contaminated and not safe to drink. So then we went to Ghana in 2019, and I just want to kind of give you an idea of what it's like to get water there. So people usually have either wells or boreholes where they pump the water, and they use typically these old jerry cans, which used to contain fuel. And this is how they collect the water. This is how they take the water home. This is what they're drinking out of. So from a Western perspective, you're going, yeah, of course you're getting sick from that, but this is how it's always been done. And people don't have that knowledge, right? They don't have it until somebody tells them that. So here's an example of collecting water. And one thing that we would see a lot, it's very hot there, it's very humid, people are collecting water, and then they're reaching into the bucket and they're taking a drink, or they're splashing their face, or they're washing their hands. Obviously now, even if that water coming from the ground was clean, it's not clean anymore. And the water coming from the ground is not clean. We've tested pretty much all the water resources, and I think over 90% of them were contaminated in the ground. And that's just because of metals in the ground. You can have animal and human waste runoff. You can have bacteria. You can have a lot of things. Here's another example of them just kind of using an old, water bottle kind of as a funnel and then filling up water. They're not doing anything else to this water. They're not going home and cleaning this water anyway. They're going to drink it right out of that. So that's a huge problem, but it's also something that can be very easily fixed and have a huge impact on their health. So here is kind of an insight into what our training would look like. In Ghana, we focused a lot more on nursing students. So they were kind of in the larger city, but they came back for the summer and were wanting to do some kind of work in their own village. And so we have very, very simple imagery, because a lot of the people in these villages might not be literate. And what's really great is we turned all of this curriculum into a children's book that we could also give to the families. And the illustrations are kind of ethnically ambiguous, so we can try to use them in as many cultures as possible, but we can edit those if we need to, and we change the names to make them culturally appropriate. And we're then able to also give something to the families, and the families can then reiterate that with the children. We all know that children are pretty good at following rules, right? If you teach them something and then they come home from school and they're like, you have to do it this way. I learned this is the right way. So it's another way to really reiterate that. The first one is maybe there's animals that go in water. Maybe there's mining going on in the area, right? There's lots of things that can go in that water and make it not. So we would meet pretty much all day for 3 days. We'd go through the entire packet of the program. There would be little quizzes. We'd have interactions. We'd have kind of skits going on. And basically at the end of the 3 days, they have to demonstrate to us that they can teach this entire thing on their own. That's where I would shadow them. I'd follow them around, kind of, in the background, watching how they're interacting with houses. And if somebody asked, they would go, I don't know, that's some American tourist, just ignore her. I don't know why she's here. I was nobody in the community, and I was totally fine with that. I don't want to come in here and think like, oh, I'm this important person. I'm not. I'm just a conduit of the information. These are the important people. These are the people that are going to be going around for a year, going door to door, trying to improve people's health, right? So they're the people who are important. I'm just there to kind of give them the resources they need to do that. So you can see some of the images we have here that would be in the children's book as well. So we're focusing on like how water gets contaminated, how your hands contaminate water. I'm really reiterating those behavior changes, like children will die from unclean water. Here's how you can prevent that. And then how do you treat water? He's gonna get some water. How would you? Yes, right? Drink the water. Right? Very simple. You're talking, thank you. You're gonna take this back to your home. Okay, now. So in order to clean the water, there's two methods. One is chlorine, which we do provide for them and teach them how to administer that safely, because obviously chlorine can be dangerous if you don't have the right amounts. But the ingenious thing about bright water is we have this little thing called a WAPI. Okay, it's a water pasteurization indicator. It's a tiny tube of wax. Water actually doesn't have to be boiled for it to be safe. We only say boil water because that's when you get a visual indication that it's hot enough. It only has to be heated to 149 degrees, and this wax melts at exactly 149 degrees. So we also taught them how to make solar cookers or solar pasteurization units out of foil and cardboard, things that are already there, things that they can get for no cost. And basically you use the sun's reflection. These people live at the equator, so there's tons of sunlight. And that reflection will start to heat the water. You leave this wax in there. As soon as it's melted, you know that water is at least 149 degrees and it's ready to go. You store it in a clean container, and that water now can be used at any time, and it is safe to drink. So here is kind of our graduating class. I was very fortunate to have my friend Yusuf, who lives here in LA, but is from Ghana, come and be my teaching assistant. He helped really make sure that things were getting across, because while we were speaking English, obviously we know when English is not your first language, there can be things lost in translation. So he was invaluable. And, you know, we tried to also give these people kind of an elevated status in the community. So they have like shirts and hats, and they have resources. And so that also lets people look at them and say, oh, they look very credible because they look like they are an authority in this matter. So again, the reason why we do this is for the children, right? If this is the leading cause of death for children, a secondary cause of death for children is respiratory illnesses, because people have gone in and said, you need to boil your water, which is good, except now they're cutting down more trees and constantly burning fires to boil all the water they need on a day-to-day basis. And that's causing a lot of other problems with deforestation and quality of air. So we want to make sure that we are doing this to help the people, help the children. And again, why this works is, number one, it's evidence-based. Number two, I'm not the person telling them this. People from their own community, they're the ones who are telling them this. It empowers people. They're not reliant on us anymore. We're not working in Nicaragua anymore, but they're still doing this. They are still having really great health benefits from the 3-year program. You don't want to go in and say, oh, I dug this well for you. That's really nice. But if you don't teach them how to keep that well from getting contaminated, as soon as you leave, it's going to get contaminated. Or if you build some kind of filtration system and leave and it breaks or it needs a replacement part, they're not going to be able to do that. You have to make sure that they are empowered to do everything themselves. It builds trust. It provides jobs. It's very easy to supply a salary for somebody in this community because the American dollar just goes so far. So just from donations, we're able to give all of those people you saw in those photos salary for an entire year. What's another indicator of quality of life? Access to jobs and education. So we are doing all of those things. We are improving the HDI of these people on many, many different levels. And it uses inexpensive or natural resources, things they already have access to, or things that we can very easily provide for them. And it's based on cross-cultural data. So I could go pretty much anywhere and use this program and not have to really change it too much, because we are using things that people from all over the world contributed to. So again, how does this help chimpanzees, right? It helps humans, but it also helps chimps, because the HDI of humans is directly related to the HDI of chimps. So if we are improving the quality of life for people, the chimps are going to benefit. Once the people realize they don't have to use a short-term strategy, they don't have to say, I don't care what I have to do, I just have to get my kids to live another day. So if you want to cut down that tree, cut down that tree. If you want to go kill that animal, kill that animal. Now we are giving them education, we're giving them jobs, we are giving them clean water. They are now healthier. They're able to, their kids are able to go to school. They're able to go to work. They're not missing work in school because they're sick. They're not paying a lot of money to doctors for medicine. They are improving their children's lives. They're saving time. They're saving money. They're realizing this works. And they're saying, now what's a long-term strategy? Maybe I don't want to cut down my whole forest, because then what do I do after it? Maybe I want to preserve that forest for my grandchildren. Maybe I don't want to go out and hunt endangered animals. Maybe I can listen to this organization and do some other type of farming or agriculture. So the higher the HDI, the more chimps there will be. So my current work is I'm a volunteer, and I'm very happy to be a candidate for the board of directors for the organization Friends of Chimps. And what's really crazy is when they contacted me, because I've been a donor to them, and I found out they actually work at Ngamba Island and in Muntemi, the two places where I lived in Uganda. So it seems like kismet that I would be able to kind of come full circle back to my chimps and be able to work with an organization that's doing work in the places where I lived back, 15 years ago. So I want to just kind of go over some of the things they're doing, because it's really amazing. They have the Burundi Chimpanzee and Community Project. And it really aligns with everything I've talked about. So they want to focus on improving the well-being of local people and protecting the forests. They have already contributed greatly to reforestation by planting all of these seedlings. They are giving people, excuse me, access to clean water sources. They are providing fuel-efficient stoves. They are focusing on women's health, and they are helping to provide education. All of those are measures of HDI, and they are using local people as their staff. So again, using that shadow approach. So everything aligns, and they're doing everything perfectly, and everything that has been shown with my research and other people's research to be effective. If you want to support any of these efforts, you can definitely go to Friends of Chimps. You can donate, you can help buy groceries for them. You can help the Bulindi project itself. You can do like what I did and adopt a chimp. I had to adopt the chimp named Sarah, obviously, because close to my heart. Or you can also go to the Brightwater Foundation at brightwaterfoundation.org and help with the clean water programs in Ghana and in some of the other places that we hope to be working in the next few years. So that is it for my presentation. And I am happy to answer any questions that you have. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. So I do have one question here. It says, given how close we are genetically to the great apes, how have those species fared with COVID? Do chimpanzees infected with COVID react in a similar way to humans? Yes, it's a really, really good question. So yes, they do get COVID. They can get sick just like we can. There have been, I know, outbreaks with COVID in a lot of areas. I was getting a lot of updates from the orangutan sanctuary I used to work with, and some other places. Even zoos are seeing a lot of animals who are getting this. So anytime you have such a closely related species, you're going to, not always, I want to preface this by saying things like HIV is very different in humans than the SIV form in primates because they've had it for about 1 million years. It's very recent in us, which is why it was so much worse for us. But COVID definitely can wreak havoc on these populations. So it's very important, and that can help us understand our evolutionary connectedness for sure. And that's one of the reasons too, we didn't want to continue with the water programs because, again, not only could you possibly be spreading that to humans, but going through those forested areas, you might also be accidentally exposing animals to that. Have you done research into how water quality affects apes? So that's a really interesting question. I have not really seen any research specifically on if unclean water affects certain groups of apes. Obviously, you can drink out of contaminated water and get a waterborne illness. What we do see in these countries with humans as well is just straight up natural selection, right? But natural selection is pretty brutal. We're going to throw something at you. Can you survive it or not? And it's really hard to watch because it causes a lot of suffering and death, which is why we want to intervene. I will tell you that just like indigenous people, apes have a lot of knowledge about medicinal plants. I know that they utilize certain plants to prevent malaria. And I know that they eat certain plants that will actually help clear intestinal parasites. So I would assume that if they do not have, and this is another conservation issue, if they're being forced out of their area because of deforestation, they have to then find a new area for water. And that water might be contaminated, and it may cause some major health issues for them. They'll probably try to self-medicate with plants, but again, that's when you're pushing natural selection in. So for adopting, that's a good qualifier. I'm going to do the air quotes. You're basically donating to take care of that chimp. So you get a certificate. So all of my donation goes straight to Sarah's care. So you don't get to bring a chimp home. We don't want them as pets. That's not okay. But you get to basically everything that you're donating goes straight to that specific chimp. Do people raised in areas with clean water resist waterborne illnesses? Yes. So people who are in these areas will tend to have some natural defenses. So what we're seeing, however, is basically in the first 5 years of life, children, it's kind of a coin toss. Do they have the immune system and the genetics to withstand all this bad water? And a large majority of them don't. So the people who are alive in those areas, they made it. But that doesn't mean they don't get sick from it. They are constantly sick, and that really wreaks havoc on the immune system and makes it very hard to fight off any other illnesses like malaria or yellow fever or dengue fever. And so it really reduces life expectancy, and it's very, very difficult for the immune system. So it is, we also see in my classes, we talk about things called balanced polymorphisms, where you'll see a genetic mutation that actually is selected for because it prevents another disease. And we do see this in other areas of the world. For example, cystic fibrosis, which is a lung disease, actually can prevent cholera. So people who lived in very, very crowded areas in Europe where cholera outbreaks were really horrible and wiping everybody out, people who randomly had this mutation that affects their lungs didn't die of cholera, but now they may have this really bad lung disease. So you sometimes have things like that, but we just want to go in and say, let's make that not the only option. Let's just make the water clean, and then therefore everybody has an equal chance of surviving. Do the treatments we use to treat diseases apes can contract work with apes too? Sometimes, yes. Some medications do not work the same on apes at all. Some medications that would be very overwhelming to us are totally fine in apes, and vice versa. I think there's one that is would be a very, very crazy hallucinogen in humans, and all it does is tranquilize chimpanzees. So we're not genetically identical. There's still some differences there. So the outcome can be different, but there's just not really any treatment in these areas for people or apes for waterborne illness. You'd have to be taking antibiotics constantly, and that wouldn't work. You'd have resistance, and antibiotics wreak havoc on other parts of your body. So instead of treatment, we want to do prevention, but that's a good question. Any reports of chimps developing high rates of respiratory disease in response to the fire clearing? Yes. In areas of Asia, I know for sure with palm oil, the air quality is so bad that humans and animals are having horrible respiratory issues. Where there's going to be slash and burn forestry, so deforestation or slash and burn agriculture, where you're burning the vegetation to make the soil more fertile, that's going to impact the air quality, and it's going to be bad for any of those living creatures, human or ape. Waterborne illness is not a huge thing in the US, but it's a good question. I know I'm from Texas. My family, part of them is from a really, really small town called Weimar, less than 2,000 people. And we all drank well water. And I came from San Antonio. I came from a big city, and I'd go there and I'd be like, this water tastes horrible. Like, why are you drinking this? It was so full of chlorine, because that's the only way you can drink that safely. So there are probably some areas in very rural parts of the US that have these issues, but most people just use chlorine and other things to prevent that. But again, then you're also ingesting high levels of chlorine all the time, which is not great either, because that is not really a long-term strategy that is good when you have to use those high doses to get that water purified. So we have a primate question. You never can have a primate as a pet. I'm going to be very clear about that. Primates are not pets at all. They're wild animals. Dogs are good pets because we domesticated them at least 10,000 years ago, and it was a mutual thing. They started hanging out near us to eat our scraps. Then we like to have them around for protection. We won, they liked it. Great. Cats, they come and they're eating the mice and the rats. They're helping us out. We're helping them out. Then we learn to like each other. Primates don't like us for good reason. Primates' role in the forest is to destroy the forest. They are supposed to rip things up, walk through things. They're eating fruit. They're pooping the fruit out in a nice pile of fertilizer so that it can grow more trees. They're destructive. They're also very intelligent, and they have very large canines, and those are weapons. And so if you tried to put them in a domesticated environment, the only way you can successfully do that is with very negative abuse, negative reinforcement. It never ends well, and it's just not a natural environment for them. So I know they're really adorable. Trust me, I've held baby chimpanzees, these orphans, and it makes your heart melt, but they deserve to be in the wild. So we do not want to have them in our homes. We want to make sure their home is protected so they can be out in the wild. But thank you. Those were all really, really great questions. Anything else? Thank you so much for the audience interaction. I really appreciate that. You can always email me as well. If I can go down the chat, I'll put my email in the chat for everybody. If you have any questions that come up later, feel free to email me. You can go to the Scholarly Presentation website. You can look at this again, or you can see my previous presentation that actually goes into a lot of detail on why primates should not be pets and some other conservation issues. And then again, I just want to reiterate, if you are here for class, make sure we have your first and last name and your professor's name. And if you're here for Flex, first and last name with the word Flex next to it so I can submit that. Other than that, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. Let me just see if there's anything else. Two more questions popped up. Are there strategies for improving the accessibility and quality of food in these areas? Yeah, it's a good question, because food and water are both an indicator of HDI. So what we want to do is combat deforestation, because what's happening is these big companies are going in and saying, if you let us cut down all these trees, and they're literally paying these people $2 a tree for these gigantic, like huge trees that, I mean, I can't even fathom why you would just pay somebody that little amount. They'll say, then you can clear the land and become farmers. And as soon as they clear all those trees, the temperature shoots up, there's not any rain, the soil becomes barren, and those people are left without anything. So Jane Goodall has a lot of better ideas in terms of other animals, the smaller animals you can domesticate, things like chickens, where you can have the eggs, you can sell eggs at market, things like rabbits as well. And then teaching people how to farm inside their type of rainforest environment without taking those trees away. How much land do apes and monkeys need? Well, that's a hard question, because some primates will stay in a home territory, and other primates like chimps will do fission fusion, which is where in the seasons where there's lots of food, they'll all come together and congregate and eat and mate and see each other. It's like a big family reunion. And then when it's the dry season and the food goes away, they will disperse into smaller areas, and they can go quite far. And that's why it's very difficult when you do have, basically when you do have like deforestation and other things, because you might actually end up not allowing those fragmented parts of the population to come back into the main population. When you start fragmenting that population, you're fragmenting the gene pool, and that makes it very, very difficult for an endangered species to survive. So, I mean, much larger area than I was able to walk around in 4 months, but I did luckily see a lot of evidence of chimps there, and I actually visually saw several groups of chimps. So they were still there, but if the level of deforestation has continued, I would be very surprised if there were chimps still in that area today. Awesome. Thank you so much for all the questions, everybody. I appreciate it. So this recording will be on the Scholarly Presentation website that Pamela, thank you so much, just posted in the chat. It'll be next week. So we got to get it all ready and transcribed, and then I got to put it up on the website. So keep a lookout for that. And then if you are in my class, I can also post it on our Canvas shell. That's perfect timing. We like to keep the Scholarly Presentation around an hour. So thank you so much for helping me do that. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and appreciate it. And please look out for my emails in fall for Professor Habib's presentation in person. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your night.